Yeah.
Hello,
Hi.
my name is Carl Calleman, and I'm a chemist, a analytical chemist, biochemist, organic chemist, and I have a PhD in physical biology, and I have been collaborating with chemical companies in the UK and elsewhere, and the probably 25 first years of my career in science was devoted to chemical problems, really. And toxicology slant was the main one. But of course, also organic synthesis and so forth that is involved. But then came a point in 1992 when a number of circumstances made me shift, and I started to focus on the Mayan calendar. And to many, of my previous colleagues, this seemed like a big step, like as if leaving science or something like that, which really it wasn't at all. It was just continuing science, but looking at it in a much broader cosmic context, you might say. And critical for anyone who wants to go into this is the Mayan calendar. I would say you cannot understand the evolution of consciousness in the universe without having a background in the Mayan calendar. That is what provides the quantum science of evolution. And I guess that's a little bit of who I am.
That's amazing. Thanks so much, Carl, for that introduction. Now, I have to put out a quick shout out to Donna Jones, who made me aware of your work. And as you know, I work in the chemical industry myself, although I come from a commercial lens rather than from the technical lens. But over the last few years, I've been really diving myself into this topic of awareness, this topic of consciousness. And I'd love for you just to speak a little bit more, if you can, about where did that interest in the Mayan calendar come from for you? What was that spark of interest and curiosity?
Oh, okay. Well, I think it's like a mission that I was born with. Some of us have missions and others have missions to a certain degree. But if you have a mission, you're more or less compelled to do something specific in life, I believe. And I had that. And but then, of course, there was a triggering point that activated this. I mean, if you're a graduate student in chemistry, it's a fairly big step still to go into fully into the Mayan calendar. And it was just a backpacking trip that I did to Mexico and Guatemala in 1979, and where I got familiarized with the Mayan culture and the Mexican culture and the calendar system, and just came to deeply realize that they were right. And basically we modern people essentially have been wrong when it comes to understanding the nature of time. It wasn't like a lightning from the sky that hit me, but the whole being in the presence of all these pyramids and so forth, it changed something in me. I realized that a bigger perspective was necessary in order to deal with a number of questions about the cosmos.
It's amazing. I just love how you've just literally in 5 minutes sort of introduced yourself. You've worked in chemistry and you're sort of evaluating and sensing into the cosmos. I just love that journey.
Well, it's a microcosmos and a macrocosmos. So if you want to study the universe or life in general, you have to look at both, I think.
And would you mind giving us a bit of a distinction on that? So when you speak to the micro and the macrocosmos, what are you speaking to there? Just to give our listeners a little bit more of a sense of context.
Um, no, I don't understand the question. What am I speaking to? Sorry.
No, sorry. So in terms, you spoke about the microcosmos
Yes,
and the
yes, yes.
macrocosmos. You need to deal with
Yeah.
both.
Yeah. Okay. Well, chemistry is definitely the microcosmos, I would say, studying molecules, atoms, and subatomic particles, and all that kind of thing. And the Mayan calendar is to understand how does the evolution of consciousness originate in the macrocosmos. We can never understand the consciousness or its evolution from the perspective, from a microcosmic perspective. We have to have a macrocosmic perspective. And also that implies having a new theory of a new quantum theory, actually, a quantum theory that deals with a macrocosmos, the big perspective. And you might say, we human beings, we are in the interface between the macrocosmos and the microcosmos. At least that's what we like to think about ourselves. I think that we're somewhere in the middle, and we are sort of the products of the interface between these different realms.
It's so intriguing for me, this, Carl, because when I think about consciousness, well, I think from a very lay point of view, I think about being aware of myself, of my behavior, of my environment, how I connect to, non-human, human, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is sort of trying to be more conscious of those interactions. But I feel you're speaking to something far more universal.
Well, yes and no, I would say. I mean, that awareness is, that's the human language to describe consciousness. But then consciousness, the way I look upon it, is a primary factor for the evolution of the universe. And all life forms are expressions of that consciousness. Small little bacteria are also expressions of that evolutional consciousness. But then, if we climb the ladder of biological evolution, we will also include human beings. But there is in this the somewhat of a mystery that the phenomenon of consciousness. How do you explain it? The fact that we are conscious beings. I suggest that you cannot explain it based on the common materialist explanations. You will have to, in order to understand it and its evolution, you will have to recognize that consciousness is a primary thing, the driving factor in all of evolution. And that, of course, is very different from what most of us are taught in schools or universities. But it's the only thing that really makes sense. A lot of philosophers would agree with this as well.
See, this is what I love about this discussion when I think of chemistry as well. The industry I work within, Carl, is to think for a second that a bacteria, something that you cannot even see, has had as much as an importance on where we are right now in terms of evolution as I or you do, or the dog outside, or the leaf, or the tree. Like that's a hell of a jump in thinking, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah. But there's been a lot of studies done by, for instance, on paramecium, this small little animal, and the studies have found that it actually does a lot of choices for its behavior. It's not just sort of something that is like a mechanical unliving thing. No, you can study it, and you can give different kind of stimuli to this little animal, and then you can actually see that it makes choices. And that implies that there is something in there, you might say, consciousness, that makes these choices. At least we think of ourselves in that way, as we are conscious and we're making choices based on our consciousness. So why not them?
So
Why not them?
I'm grinning, honestly. For those that are listening to us, I'm absolutely grinning because I just love the curiosity of this exploration. And what I'm thinking about is, I have this interest. I'd love to put a proposition to you, Carl. I've got a lot of very interesting people in my network, some of which are deeply into spirituality, consciousness, some less so. And there's quite often a debate about, do we, as spiritual beings having a human experience on the planet, do we actually have free will? Do we really have choice? Or is it just a reaction to our outside environment in the moment? And or is it both? Is it all of it? Like, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are around that reflection or question.
Yeah. I think we have choices within certain frames. I think the evolution of consciousness creates different aspects of the mind throughout its evolution. And so today, human beings have a different kind of a mind compared to what they had, say, 40,000 years ago, when I would say they hardly had not any mind at all. And what happened, at least from the Mayan calendar perspective, is that 5,130 years ago, people started to download a rational mind from the cosmos. In other words, the mind is not a product of the brain. The mind is something that the brain downloads from the cosmos. And that changed the human beings. And I would say gave them a certain amount of choice, or certain amount of certainly ability to rationally contemplate reality, and civilization became a product of the new mind that people had downloaded. My sense of that, within that framework and other frameworks that human beings have downloaded at later points in time, closer to our own time, and continue to do at this particular time, within that framework, we do have a certain level of choice. But the downloading of these minds from the cosmos, they set us on certain paths. Within that framework, we operate within what we would call civilization, for instance, for the past 5,130 years. So I wouldn't say that we're not mechanical in the sense that we have no choice, that everything is predetermined. That would be unlike quantum theory, I would say. But it does set certain frames to within which we need to behave and operate, so to speak, to be part of this cosmic plan that we're living in.
So interesting. So interesting. So what I've also been studying a bit over the last couple of years is around regeneration. So sort of how does the plant regenerate? How do we regenerate? So how do we have systems while we are on this planet having a human experience? How do we actually design or create a world that is life-giving and not extractive? And that's where I'm trying to spend more and more of my time, Carl. And that sort of brings us to this discussion now around the chemical industry, which is predominantly an extractive industry. We take stuff out of the ground, we turn it into products. Not all of it can go back into regenerative practices. And I'm just wondering, do you think in the next 20 years, 50 years, 100 years? Is there a download waiting to happen where we can really accelerate that sort of life-giving structure somehow?
Well, that's not really how I look upon it. You may look upon the cosmic plan from the perspective of the Mayan calendar as a climb of a pyramid, and with the 9 particular levels, and each of these levels are endowing the living species with some kind of a thinking framework, a state of consciousness, I would say, or a quantum state of consciousness. And all of those actually all of those 9 states of consciousness have actually become accessible to humanity already. And the last one, the highest level, is the 9th wave, or the 9th state of consciousness, which is a unity state of consciousness. And that became accessible in the year 2011. Most people thought it was 2012, but that was just a myth. It was actually 2011, and the Maya were very precise in how they looked upon these things in ancient times. But it's one thing that a state of consciousness like that becomes accessible, that in principle we may be able to download it as a result of having climbed 9 different states, incorporated all of these different states. It's another thing to actually access this and resonate with it and incorporate it in our, what should I say, mental design, or and make it part of us, and people haven't done that yet. That requires cultivating a new state of consciousness, I would say, and those interested can go to my websites or maybe to the website of Patricia Albert's Evolutionary Collective and look upon how to access the higher states of consciousness. But to the extent that people do cultivate and come to incorporate in their mind this higher state, the unity state of consciousness, then that will have consequences for everything that has to do with the relationship between human beings and nature. And that, you might say, would how we think about things when it comes to regeneration, when it comes to chemical pollution, or any of these matters really are about to what extent we have downloaded and made part of ourselves a state of unity consciousness. It's the top level of the pyramid that brings this about. And so unfortunately, I don't think at this point there is any new sort of download to wait for, to sort of on the horizon of time to hope for. It's accessible already at this point, but what we need to do is to develop techniques and have the intention actually of downloading it.
It's so interesting. One of my previous guests on episode 4, Carl Helen, she spoke about, because the podcast, as you know, is called Activating Consciousness, and she said she feels it's more of a revealing of consciousness. And it's sort of, that feels a little bit what you're speaking to, actually.
Yeah. You can say so. It's there. It's already there as a potential, but it has to be revealed or accessed, or whatever term you'd like to use. Yes, Gary.
So interesting. And do you have any? We'll direct people towards your work and how to contact you after this conversation. But do you have any sort of invitations? Is there? I know there's no quick fix for this sort of stuff, but do you have any? Do you have any invitations? Some ideas for people listening to us to to maybe where can they go to get curious? Maybe, like say, resources, any specific sort of techniques that you use to try and access that sort of ninth wave?
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know if I have everything available here for this particular talk. Uh, Certainly, I recommend then my own books and my own website, calleman.com. For those that want to see the wave, especially the ninth wave, which is a wave that brings a quantum state from the cosmos. So it's macrocosmic quantum theory that we are talking about. There is a reference on my website to that particular chart, which is developing day by day, and you can see where we are in the unfolding of a wave. And these waves, incidentally, is what ancient peoples would talk about as cosmic serpents, or among the Mexicans, the plumed serpent. But then, I also want to recommend the work of Patricia Albert, Evolutionary Collective. That's not necessarily for those that want to understand the whole thing. It's more for those that want to practice the thing. She does provide an inroad to doing that, to experiencing the meaning of the ninth wave. But that would be my answer. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. No, Carl, it's brilliant. I'm so grateful for you joining me today, and again for Donna connecting me to your work, because it's, this is new for me. I appreciate you sparing the time, but there's so much potential, I believe, within the chemical and allied industries to, as you say, access more of this sort of cosmic wisdoms that we can turn around the extractive challenges and ways that we have today.
Yeah. Well, I just want to add that, the way we have been talking about here, it's been quite philosophical, so to speak. And but at the same time, I want to emphasize that this is really a theory based in empirical evidence, empirical science, and also that the reason I have been attracted to the Maya, I think, except for having sort of a mission born with, is the fact that, unlike most other ancient peoples that had philosophies along the lines that we've been talking around here, along those, the Maya developed calendars. And those calendars are not at all like what people are used to. But those calendars then means that we have numbers. Calendars means numbers in time, you might say. And once you have numbers, you have the potential for science, and you have the potential for matching the numbers to what we know from the modern science of the evolution of the universe. And so here you can actually have a bridge between the ancient philosophies and the modern science, including very much chemistry, which is, where quantum ideas is a fundamental basis. And so that's why this may appeal to people who also have a very rigorous critical mind.
That's such a great point. That's such a brilliant point. I'm glad you mentioned that, Carl, because you say it can feel these conversations a little bit, to use a Western word, woo-woo, and a little bit sort of out there. But actually what you're saying
out there.
Yeah, but what you're saying is it's grounded in evidence from your research, from your understanding.
Absolutely.
That's so cool. And I think that the last thing I'd like to leave, and again, this is from watching you previously, my interest was really piqued, Carl, when you shared this statement, which was geometry is as important as energy in this whole. Do you mind speaking to that as we wrap up today? Because I thought that was such an interesting statement. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, certainly on the level of microcosmic quantum theory, I would say that, for instance, the Schrödinger equation that really is at the basis of understanding the molecular or the atomic structure of all chemical elements. It's described as potential locations of orbits, of electrons in different kinds of orbitals. But nobody really points out the fact that these orbitals, they follow certain geometries, and nobody is really able to explain where do these geometries come from. But anyway, this is telling us is that on a subatomic level, the energy fields of electrons are determined by set geometries, the SPD orbitals and so forth. And without these orbitals, everything would just be some kind of an amorphous nothingness or everythingness without any kind of structure anywhere. So for any understanding of the nature of the universe, it is important to take specific geometries into account. And this is not only something that applies to the microcosmic level according to the Schrödinger equation, it's also then something that very much applies, these geometries apply to the macrocosmic levels according to the macrocosmic quantum theory based on the Mayan calendar.
Fascinating. I feel like I've had an absolute, not just an education, but a beautiful experience sharing this with you today, Carl. So thank you so much for sparing the time.
Thank you very much for having me, Gary. It's been a pleasure.
It's been great. I'll make sure that I attach the Evolutionary Collective talk that I met you through.
Oh, okay.
And also all of your details in the show notes. So thank you very much for joining us today. And thanks again, Carl. Have a great day.
Thank you.